What if a passenger plane disappeared after takeoff and then landed 37 years later? That is the legend that refuses to stay buried. It gets retold, reposted, and rewritten. And every time it comes back, it sounds just a little more impossible. The story usually begins in 1955. A passenger plane, often identified as Pan Am Flight 914, is said to take off with dozens of people on board. In some versions, it leaves New York for Miami. In others, the route shifts slightly, as if the story itself cannot settle on one reality. But the core claim stays the same. The plane climbs, disappears, and never arrives. Then, almost immediately, the mystery deepens. It is said to vanish from radar shortly after takeoff. Search teams are sent out. They scan the sky, the ocean, and every possible route the aircraft could have taken. Investigators look for wreckage, ships look for debris, families wait for answers that never come. And there are none. No rescue, no crash site, no explanation. Just silence. That kind of silence is powerful. It leaves room for fear, speculation, and the human urge to fill in the blanks. When something disappears without a trace, people do not just ask where it went, they ask what could possibly take it away. That is where the legend begins to breathe. Because years later, the story takes a turn so wild it almost sounds like a joke. According to the myth, the plane suddenly reappears decades later and lands safely, not in pieces, not as wreckage. It lands intact, like it simply stepped out of time and returned to finish the flight. And the passengers? They are said to look exactly the same. No aging, no confusion, no time lost in their faces. They allegedly step off the plane believing only a few hours have passed. To them, the flight felt normal. To everyone outside the cabin, 37 years had gone by. That is the kind of detail that hooks people instantly. Because if it were true, it would not just be a mystery, it would be a rewrite of physics. It would mean a commercial aircraft slipped into another timeline and came back with the passengers preserved inside like a sealed moment in history. It is a stunning idea. It is also exactly why this story spread so fast. But here is the first problem. The details do not behave like a real aviation case. The location changes, the airline story changes, the photos change, even the dates move around depending on who is telling it. That kind of inconsistency is a huge clue. Real events have paperwork. Real tragedies have records. Legends have variations. And this one has plenty. When fact-checkers traced the story, they found it linked to Weekly World News, a tabloid famous for sensational stories that were never meant to be taken as fact. The hoax version of the tale appeared there in the 1980s, long after the supposed 1955 disappearance. It was then republished and reposted in different forms, which helped keep the myth alive. That matters a lot. Because a story does not become true just because it sounds old. If a major passenger plane had vanished in the 1950s, there should be a trail. Newspaper coverage, airline statements, accident files, government investigation records. Something. Instead, when investigators checked transportation error records from that period, they found no evidence matching the claim. No official incident file. No credible documentation of a Pan Am Flight 914 disappearance and miraculous return. Nothing where a real event should leave a mark. And that is where the story starts to collapse. Even the supposed proof is shaky. The airplane photo attached to early versions of the tale has been traced to stock imagery, not to a missing 1950s passenger plane. Later versions of the story even used different images for the supposed eyewitnesses, which makes the whole thing look less like reporting and more like decoration. That is a major red flag. Because if you zoom out, there is another reason this legend feels so believable. It borrows emotional weight from real aviation mysteries. People remember disappearances that never got clean answers. Amelia Earhart, MH370. Flights that touched the public imagination because there was uncertainty, loss, and a haunting lack of closure. This legend taps into that same fear. Then it adds a science fiction ending. That combination is powerful. A disappearance is unsettling. A disappearance with a time travel return is unforgettable. It gives the brain a complete story, even when the evidence is missing. And the internet loves a complete story. Especially one that can be reduced into a single shocking sentence. A plane vanished, a plane returned, the passengers never aged. That is the kind of headline people share before they ask whether it is true. But a good mystery should survive the question. This one does not. Another clue comes from the time period itself. In the 1950s, civilian radar and air traffic control was still developing into modern systems. Controllers relied on early surveillance tools, basic scopes, and limited tracking compared with what we know today. Aircraft could be harder to follow than they are now. But harder to track is not the same as impossible to find, and it definitely is not the same as vanishing into the future. That distinction matters. A weak tracking system can explain uncertainty. It cannot explain time travel. So why does the story keep resurfacing? Because it is built like a perfect urban legend. It uses a real-sounding airline name. It places the event in a recognizable era. It adds a dramatic disappearance. Then it ends with a surreal payoff that feels too strange to ignore. That structure makes it spread. And once social media gets hold of it, the legend gets a second life. Clips, reposts, and reaction videos can turn a tabloid hoax into something that feels like hidden history. A lot of people never see the source. They only see the shock value. That is how myths travel now, not through evidence, through momentum. There is even a closely related cousin story called Santiago Flight 513, which claims a plane vanished in the 1950s and reappeared decades later with skeletons on board. That legend has the same DNA, same impossible timing, same dramatic return, same lack of credible archival proof. And like Pan Am 914, it falls apart under basic fact-checking. No reliable contemporary reporting, no solid investigation trail, no verifiable evidence that the airline's story even existed as claimed. Different names, same pattern. That is why these stories are so useful for skepticism. They remind us that being fascinating is not the same as being factual. A myth can be polished, a hoax can be repeated, a false story can gather details that make it look more official each time it spreads. But once you ask the simple questions, it starts to unravel. Who first published it? Can the photos be traced? Are there contemporary reports? Is there an official record? Do the details stay the same? If the answer keeps coming back no, then the mystery stops being history and becomes legend. And that does not mean it is boring. Honestly, the truth makes it even more interesting. Because the real story is not about a plane crossing dimensions. It is about how easily people can mistake a sensational tale for a historical event when the story is repeated enough times. It is about why our brains love unresolved mysteries. It is about how a tabloid headline from decades ago can survive long enough to look like ancient folklore. And it is about the one thing every real investigation depends on: evidence. Without evidence, a story may still entertain us, but it cannot claim the truth. So no, there is no verified proof that a passenger plane vanished in 1955 and landed 37 years later with untouched passengers on board. That version of the tale lives as one of the internet's most famous mystery legends, not as a documented event. Still, you can see why people fall for it. It has everything: disappearance, time travel, a clean, eerie ending. It is the kind of story that makes you wonder, even after you know better. And maybe that is the real power of legends like this. They do not survive because they are true. They survive because they are unforgettable. Do you think time travel is possible? Comment yes or no.